Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Medlock Post. This is your host, Richard G. Medlock. Happy to be here today. This is July 14th, 2022. And today's episode is SCOTUS and the Constitution. Yes, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court and its relationship to the Constitution. Yes, crazy outlook, right? But there's some things going on I think we need to look at and help us understand the Constitution, the role of the Supreme Court, and the role of Congress in what's happening here. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are the views and opinions of the host. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to have you listening in, and happy to be here myself. What a glorious day. It's always a beautiful day in America for many reasons. Even though things are not going as we seem, to be in America where we have freedoms, even though they're under attack, it's a glorious day. Think of people in other countries. Think of Venezuela, Cuba. You think they wake up in the morning thinking it's a beautiful day to live under communism? Russia, China, North Korea? I don't think so. They probably wake up and thinking, how am I going to make it through another day? All right, so we're going to be focusing on Supreme Court and the Constitution today. A couple of different looks at this to show the contrast of what's happening. Catch you up to date a little bit. And yesterday, the Circuit Court of the District of Columbia under the Department of Justice filed a January 6th lawsuit against Donald J. Trump and 37 co-defendants. 37 co-defendants. Now, they're not named yet. They're on the thing, but they've been blocked out. I don't know why, but Donald Trump's name is on there. This again is the attack. This again is the baggage that's being put on Donald Trump. And go back to my episode 15. I did a soundbite yesterday's episode 21. This is episode 22. And go back and listen to my thoughts on that. July 14th, 1789. Does that ring a bell, folks? That's the day the peasants charged the Bastille and the French Revolution started. They were fed up with it. Now, the French Revolution is an outshoot of the American Revolution. By 1889 or 1789, the Constitution was out there. It hadn't been ratified yet, but it was out there. People knew about it, and the peasants in France said, "We've had enough. We're tired of this tyranny that has been running our lives and killing us when they want and take everything they want." So the French Revolution started July 14th, 1789. Another quick note. Last night in the House Judiciary Committee, and remember that the committees in Congress, right now, the majority is Democratic Socialist. So last night, and I want you to think about where was the common sense in this thinking. But there was a bill proposed to increase penalties for sex traffickers. And every Democrat on that committee, the House Judiciary Committee, voted against increasing penalties against sex traffickers. That alone tells you that the Democratic Socialists are not a party of rule of law. Sex traffickers should be hanged in the square. It's an abomination to humanity what they do. Okay. Little asides there. Keep you appraised. I'm going to read 3 statements to you. And I want you to think about who said these statements before we get into the body of the program today, the body of our message. So, 3 statements. Use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Statement number 2. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. And the last statement, discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. All right, 3 statements. I want you to hang on to those. Think about who might have said those statements. All attacking the Constitution, the courts, and the founding fathers. Those little 3 statements. And while you're thinking, folks, while you're thinking, we're going to go to a break and listen to a few commercial messages, and we will be right back. Okay, welcome back. Now, I don't know if there was 1 commercial, 2 commercials, or no commercials. All right, but that's how it works. There was a column the other day in the LA Times. It was written by Nicholas Goldberg. And I think Nicholas, he either didn't like the Constitution prior to the Supreme Court rulings, or he now doesn't like the Constitution because of the Supreme Court rulings, or he had an argument with his wife, or got a ticket coming to work, or something. He doesn't sound like a very happy person, a very pleased person in his writings here. The title of his column is Hate the Supreme Court? ? Our problems actually start with the Constitution. Now think about those 3 statements I read. Now let's listen to what Nicholas Goldberg had to write. He starts, so you're unhappy with the Supreme Court justices who turn back the clock of time on environmental protection, abortion, school prayer, and guns. You're angry because they're ideologues with a reactionary agenda, flexing their muscles to eliminate rights, weaken government, and endanger the planet. Me too. They're reprehensible. But let's be honest. the problem isn't just with the justices. The problem, or at least a substantial portion of it, lies with the United States Constitution itself. So do you see why Nicholas Goldberg might have been having a pretty bad day when he wrote this? He sounds actually angry, doesn't he? Let's continue with Mr. Goldberg. Yes, the hallowed Constitution, the document hammered out in 1787 by 55 bewigged men in Philadelphia, our revered charter that lays out the foundational rules and principles at the heart of the American experiment, freedom of speech and religion, the separation of powers, federalism, bicameralism, and all the other checks, balances, and rights, promises, and innovations that make the nation what it is. All right, now that doesn't sound too bad, except bewigged men. All right, bicameralism is a government with two houses of Congress. Okay, two houses of Congress, that's what that means. He quotes David S. Law, a professor at the University of Virginia School of Law. And Professor Law states this: it was written by a small group of white male landowners. Remember, they always make sure to say white, don't they? Okay. It was written by a small group of white male landowners clustered along the eastern seaboard in a largely agrarian society in the late 1700s. How could it possibly fit the needs of a excuse me, I lost my place. I'm sorry. I blinked and I lost my place. I'll start over. How could it possibly fit the needs of a highly diverse country of 300 plus million people in the 21st century, a military and economic superpower in a globalized world, a highly developed post-industrial nation that stretches from sea to shining sea? Professor Law asked that question. Well, let me ask Professor Law and let me ask Nicholas Goldberg. What is so bad about the principles of freedom of speech and religion? What is so bad about the separation of powers? What is so bad about federalism? What is so bad about bicameralism and all other checks, balances, and rights, promises, and innovations that make this nation what it is? What is so bad about that? How does that not fit into the 21st century? That's my question. How do those principles and values not fit in to the 21st century? And I don't think Professor Law and Mr. Goldberg would really want to answer that question. If they do, they're invited to come and be on this program and let's discuss it. I'd love to have them on here and discuss why they are turning their back on these great principles. Now back to Mr. Goldberg. And he tried to some way redeem himself here. In its defense, the 235-year-old Constitution has been extraordinarily resilient. It is the oldest constitution still in force in the world. Many young nations have used it in its as a model of inspiration, beginning with France. I just told you on July 4th, 1789, the French Revolution began, whose revolution came just a few years after ours. Nations emerging from colonialism in the 20th century used it as well. 135 nations. So there must have been something right about it. Continuing with Mr. Goldberg. Now here comes the turn again. The Constitution created the undemocratic U.S. Senate that allots the same representation to senators to a state like Wyoming, which has fewer than 600,000 people, as it does to California with nearly 40 million people. Well, Mr. Goldberg, apparently you don't understand how the Senate works and you don't understand how the House works. California and New York have the most representatives in Congress, in the House of Representatives, than any other state. And Florida's in there too. So see, that's part of the checks and balances. So over here in the Senate, each state has equal votes. In the House, it's divided up by population. Mr. Goldberg, do you not understand that? Apparently not. Continuing with Mr. Goldberg, it's got antiquated and dangerous provisions such as the anachronistic right to bear arms. That's an anachronistic right to bear arms. Like, let's go back to the caveman, okay? Which reflects long forgotten concerns dating to post-revolutionary America. Today, no countries protect gun rights in their constitution except the United States, Guatemala, and Mexico. And Mr. Goldberg, there's a reason those countries do not allow citizens to own guns. It's so they can control them. So, Mr. Goldberg, are you in favor of the government taking away our guns, which it sounds like here, and the government become a tyranny, a totalitarianism, and the people have no way to fight back? They do, but they won't have guns. Continuing with Mr. Goldberg. What's more, constitutional thinking was evolved, or has evolved, since 1787. Today, most new constitutions include far more enumerated rights than ours, notes David Law. The right to education, for instance, and to privacy, food, health care, and housing. Many modern constitutions protect reproductive rights, which we are telling you that means abortion, freedom of movement, and the right to unionize, and the rights of the disabled. Well, let's address this, Professor Law and Mr. Goldberg. Most new constitutions are being done under socialism, Marxism, communism, and they like to give free things away. Look at Canada. They've had free health care, universal health care, since the 50s, I think, 50s, 60s. It's been a disaster. They give away things. Free education. Oh, you just come free education. Right to privacy. We've all had right to privacy. You have a right to food, health care, and housing. Who gave us those rights? The government? The government gave us rights to food, health care, and housing? I don't think so. But here, they're laying out a cause for a socialistic society where the government provides everything. Continuing with Mr. Goldberg. Oh, and let me address right to unionize and rights of the disabled. Well, you have a right to unionize now. What he's talking about here, you have a lot of states that have right to work laws, which means you don't have to belong to a union to get a job and work. Where in some states, you have to belong to a union. Now that's control. Rights of the disabled. Don't get me on that. Disabled, real disabled people, yeah, there's laws out there, but they get pushed to the side every day. But those that aren't disabled and get on disability, it's an open checkbook. Back to Mr. Goldberg. The Constitution's lack of specificity leaves much to the interpretation of the Supreme Court. Well, guess what, Mr. Goldberg? That's why it was set up, granting tremendous power to that group of 9 unelected justices, especially since the Constitution also grants them life tenure. Again, he is attacking the Constitution. This is also going back to people calling for the Supreme Court to be abolished. Back to Mr. Goldberg. That system might work reasonably well if the justices interpreted broad principles with an eye to the present and the future, allowing for constitutional adaptation and flexibility. Well, Mr. Goldberg, that is against the law. That's why activist judges have done this, what Mr. Goldberg just explained, creating new laws without legislation, and that has created havoc and chaos in America. And it's happening today. How many judges are out there ruling that these new laws, abortion laws, in states that were sitting there or have been passed since the SCOTUS ruling against Roe versus Wade, these judges are blocking them and saying they're unconstitutional? Well, wait a minute. How can they be unconstitutional? Because the Supreme Court said this goes back to the states. Let them decide. Well, they've decided. But now an activist judge who's probably appointed by Obama or Clinton are sitting there going, nope, can't do that. Nope. You got to have abortions all the way till they're 6 months old. Born and 6 months old. There are people that want to do that. But these days, the court is in the hands of a group of arch conservatives and so-called originalists who believe in sticking narrowly to the Constitution's text, and where interpretation is necessary, relying on what they discern the framers believed in 1787. Well, you know what? That's what they're supposed to do. And if you go back to some of these rulings, especially on the guns in New York and Roe versus Wade and EPA and other rulings, they went back in history. They went back to the Founding Fathers. They went back to other rulings in courts and looked at what had been done. They went back and learned from history. I talked about Naomi Wolf the other day, a liberal feminist who all of a sudden she went back and did her research and went back and apparently read the Founding Fathers and the Constitution and says, wait a minute, we're going down a road of tyranny in this country. It's already started. And the forefathers had a prophetic vision that we needed these arms to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. Simple as that, folks. Simple as that. Continuing with Mr. Goldberg. That just makes our Constitution seem all the more out of date. Of course, if we feel trapped by an archaic Constitution, there's a mechanism called revising it. It's called an amendment. And that is true, Mr. Goldberg. And the Constitution has been amended several times. There's an amendment now by Michael Moore. He wants to ban guns. Oh, he's added one more thing. He wants to confiscate all guns, but then he lists all these things you have to do to get a gun, which doesn't make sense. If you're going to confiscate all guns, but anyway, but he's added another one in there. It's kind of, well, two more. 30-day waiting period from your application, and then your spouse, your ex-spouse, your mother, your father, your brother, your cousin, your employer, and your next door neighbor, and your minister, if you have one, and on and on and on, have to sign off and approve you getting a gun. Yeah. Back to Mr. Goldberg. Of course, if we feel trapped by an archaic the amendment, So Mr. Goldberg says, by all means, let's do that, right? Let's ban corporate money from politics. Well, they tried that with McCain-Feingold Act, and all it did was put more money into politics. Protect gay, transgender, and women's rights. Fix the Senate. Well, fix the Senate. Okay, let me go back to the gay, transgender, and women. They have rights. They are protected, but not to the extent that those groups want it to be. Okay. Fix the Senate. In the Constitution, the original Constitution, senators were appointed by the state legislature and went to Congress to protect the state's rights from the House of Representatives. In 1913, the 17th Amendment came around and said, oops, senators can be elected by popular vote. And that has created chaos ever since. So if you want to fix it, let's do away with the 17th Amendment and have state legislatures send the two senators. Now, what he wants to do, Mr. Goldberg, is send 50 senators from California and 50 from New York and Florida, and on a population size like the House of Representatives. You're talking about chaos. Created chaos. Mr. Goldberg again. Most nations replace their constitutions every 19 years on average. Thomas Jefferson believed a new constitution should be written by each new generation. No, sir, he did not. That is a complete falsehood, and I'm calling you on it. Mr. Goldberg again. Unfortunately, amending the U.S. Constitution is extraordinarily difficult. It requires a vote of 2/3 of both houses of Congress, and after that, ratification by 3/4 of the states, a double supermajority. And it was set up that way. But we went from 10 amendments to 27. So 17 amendments have been added to the Constitution. If it's worthy, it will get through. But today, with the blue states and the red states, getting that 3/4 of the states to agree is probably not going to happen on anything. And anyway, all right, ladies and gentlemen, sounds like it's time for another commercial break, and we will be right back when they are over. And we are back. We really are. All right. So now let me go back and explain to you, or reread those three statements and tell you where they came from. You probably thought they came from Chuck Schumer or Barack Obama, and they've said these things, or maybe even Bill and Hillary Clinton, etc. Okay. Use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. It's almost like Mr. Goldberg read this before he wrote his article. And then the last one, discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. I think that I'd try to do that as well. You're a bunch of old white men in an agrarian society, which what most of America was up until the Industrial Revolution. And things got along just fine even after that, until the Marxists started moving in under Woodrow Wilson. So, how many guesses have you made as to who said or where these statements came from? Did you know In the 1940s and 1950s, the FBI had a task force on communism. They studied communism in the United States and in Russia. Russia was the prominent communist nation causing all the problems. China was still kind of dormant a little bit over there, except with their conflicts with Russia. So this task force, headed up, of course, by, I just forgot his name. I'll think of it. It'll come to me. J. Edgar Hoover. He appointed this because communism was really growing in the United States. There was a Communist Party USA, there was a Socialist Party, and they were causing some problems. They were trying to get bills passed, and we had a Marxist and some other communists in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration. Stuart Chase was one of them. And Senator Joe McCarthy tried to use his pulpit in the U.S. Senate to bring this to light. There are communists out there. They're in our government. They're in our universities. They're in our businesses. And he couldn't get any support. And he was castigated. And several years later, he passed away of unknown causes. He should be given a medal for what he did. These are the three ones, it's number 16, number 29, and number 30, of 45 goals that communism wanted to use to take over America. These were read into Congress in 1963, and it caused quite a stir at the time. These goals came from interviews with communists that had been arrested by the FBI, other interviews, and also from Russian communist spies that they had captured here in the United States, and had also been captured in Europe, and the FBI went over and investigated them. And we're going to get to more of these 45 goals, just not today. But these are the ones pertinent to what is happening about the attacks on the Constitution. Now, right now, in the last week, I could not believe the multitude of articles coming out saying the same thing that Nicholas Goldberg is saying. Just attacking the Constitution, attacking the Supreme Court. They've pulled out the stops on this, folks. They want everybody believing the Constitution needs to be changed. We need to do it's old-fashioned. It doesn't fit our times. And we need to stop this. We need to stop it. So that's where those three statements came from. They're part of a communist plan, 45 goals, to take over America without firing a shot. They've done a pretty good job. All right. Then there's another article in the Washington Times by John Dawkins. He is a former acting Attorney General for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Justice. His last name is Daukas. Now, this is just the opposite of what Nicholas Goldberg was writing. He says, in the New York Times headlines, Saturday, July 2nd, it claimed, court's term was its most conservative since 1931. Well, Mr. Dawkins says a more accurate headline would have been, court's term was its most democratic and constitutional since 1931. You see the difference? After all, the Supreme Court strengthened the ability of the people to govern themselves and undermined authoritarian government by the few. Now, we're going to break down what he's talking about here. Now, despite the fact that the court issued a number of rulings where there was wide agreement, the left has focused on a few where the division was stark, just not for the reasons they claim. And we've been trying to point this out. It's like all they heard was Roe versus Wade is overturned. Oh no, women are going to die. We can't kill babies. This was their reaction. It still is. Except now it's reproductive rights instead of abortion. The polls hammered them on killing babies. Now, as of 2 days ago, the polls are showing it hasn't moved one way or the other. Democrat to Republican, Republican to Democrat on this because of the SCOTUS rulings or Roe versus Wade. It's not moving, the polls. People are moving on. In Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which overturned Roe versus Wade, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the Supreme Court left to the people and our elected representatives profound decisions about whether abortion should be prescribed in part or whole or left entirely unrestricted. Now, folks, that is happening in states, and activist judges are shutting those new laws down. They're probably not going to hold their rulings, but they're saying the states are out there changing things or leaving it alone. Colorado, I mean, you can have an abortion up to birth. They're not making any changes. California, basically do what you want. They're not going to make any changes. But other states are saying 15 weeks. There's some heartbeat laws out there. They're all being challenged. Dobbs was not pro-life or anti-abortion. It was pro-democracy and pro-constitution. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is what is driving the Democratic Socialist nuts. Because the rulings were based to support and sustain and strengthen the Constitution of the United States. The Supreme Court expressed no opinion as to whether abortion should be legal or regulated. Do you understand that? Rather, it ruled that as the Constitution is silent on abortion, the issue should be decided by the people through their elected representatives. The 10th Amendment states rights. If the federal government doesn't have the authority to do it, it's left up to the states individually. The Supreme Court respected democracy in the ruling, quote, "We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. The Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives." That was from the majority opinion. We're going to leave it up to the people. And because we're a republic, your elected officials will make that decision. Now, I think one state, I'm not sure about this, I might be wrong, I think one state is actually going to put it on their November ballot and let the people know we're going to have abortion or not. And that's legal. In criticizing Dobbs, few, if any, seriously argue the Constitution includes a right to abortion. Instead, critics essentially claim the Constitution should include a right to abortion. But as the court held, Where the Constitution is silent on an issue, it is for the people through their democratic institutions to determine what the law should be. Even late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg questioned the reasoning of Roe and the strategy of so dramatic an assumption or assertion of authority by the court. Understand that? We're assuming things that aren't there. John Roberts did that, ruling on Obamacare. When judges look outside the Constitution or statutes, in truth, they look only within themselves to determine what they believe is right and wrong. That is precisely the exercise American voters should engage in, but it is abhorrent in judges as it leads to authoritarian rule by the few and strips the people of their right to self-determination. And there's that background music again, ladies and gentlemen. We're not through with Mr. Dawkins, but we need to break for a few commercial messages, and we will be right back. All right, welcome back. I hope you're seeing the contrast here. I hope you're understanding rule versus law versus ruler's law. All right, he continues. In West Virginia versus Environmental Protection Agency, the Supreme Court protected the separation of powers and democracy by again preventing the few unconstitutionally from ruling over the masses. The Supreme Court held unelected, often lifelong career civil servants cannot make law. Only Congress can, at least as to major questions significantly affecting American life. Again, West Virginia v. EPA was not pro-environmental or anti-environmental. It was pro-democracy and pro-constitution. The EPA's actions in West Virginia case were particularly obnoxious. The Obama administration campaigned on it. He and his vice president at the time, Joe Biden, campaigned with a desire to shut down or significantly curtail the use of coal and gas power. But Congress refused to pass supporting legislation. And ladies and gentlemen, that's where it should have stopped. But Obama's big thing was the Constitution is too restrictive and I can't live by it. He said that many times. Back to Mr. Dawkins. In 2014, faced with a Congress that failed to comply with his wishes, then President Barack Obama famously and perhaps infamously said, quote, "I've got a pen and I've got a phone and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward," unquote. So Mr. Obama, now a totalitarian dictator, started making law. DACA was one of those laws. The courts ruled 3 times DACA was illegal, but the Obama administration kept going with it. Every ruling against the Obama administration by the courts, they ignored. In 2015, the Obama administration in-run Congress and caused the EPA unilaterally to issue regulations which Congress refused to do. That is, unelected EPA staff effectively ordered a nationwide shift away from coal and gas after the people's democratically elected representatives in Congress refused to do so. Do you see the tyranny in this? But do you see what the Supreme Court is doing, or did do? The Supreme Court overturned the EPA's actions, thus enforcing the Constitution's separation of powers and again defending democracy and also defending the Constitution. As Justice Neil M. Gorsuch aptly explained in his concurring opinion, quote, when Congress seems slow to solve problems, it may be natural that those in the executive branch might seek to take matters into their own hands. But the Constitution does not authorize agencies to use pen and phone regulations as substitutes for laws passed by the people's representative. Unquote. He is slapping the hands of Obama, of Joe Biden, of all these administrative agencies that have done this for years and years and years. You can't do that. But they're still doing it. The Securities Exchange Commission is still pushing all these corporations to have to file all these climate footprint reports. But there's pushback, lots of pushback there. Under the Constitution, Congress passes laws and the executive branch implements them. And Supreme Court makes a decision, is it in line with the Constitution? Basically, is it rule of law or is it ruler's law? And that's what we're talking about here today. All right. Oh, there's that music again. We have one more segment before we wrap this up, but unfortunately we have to take a break. All right, we are back. We are back. I'm going to wrap this up about the Supreme Court and the Constitution. And Mr. Dawkins, John Dawkins, is making it very, very clear that these decisions by the Supreme Court benefited us as citizens of the United States. So going back to Mr. Dawkins, great article. Finally, the Supreme Court in several decisions affirmed that when the Constitution does not clearly provide a right, the government must respect it. In New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the Supreme Court held that as the Second Amendment explicitly gives the people the right to bear arms, states cannot ban people from bearing arms by wholesale refusing to grant gun carry permits. It's interesting. This is the state of New York, and you had to prove that you needed to defend yourself. You had to prove it every time you went out of your house. Well, that shouldn't be hard to do in New York, especially in the city of New York. But then, so the decision comes down. What does New York do? And California did it. They come out and pass new legislation with different requirements now. Now you've got to show, you've got to give us your social media so we can go through your social media and make sure you're not some crazy person. And then California, we're going to judge it on good moral character or good character. I don't know if they know what the word moral means out in California in their government. But you have to be a person of good character. They're just pushing the envelope again. The Democratic Socialists do not care about the rule of law. They want power. They want power over the people. They want power over the money and everything else. In Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, the Supreme Court held that as the First Amendment explicitly prohibits the government from prohibiting free exercise of religion, a school board cannot fire a football coach or anybody else from praying after a football game. The Supreme Court is handing power back to the legislative branch. Ironically, although they control both houses of Congress, federal, and the presidency, many Democrats are among the most vociferous opponents of the court's rulings, and they haven't stopped at mere objecting. Some have called for court packing. They were doing that prior. They started that when Trump was in office. Impeaching justices for what? Yeah, they want to impeach them. Or you didn't rule Chuck Schumer told you how to rule and you didn't do it, so we're going to impeach you. And refuse to condemn, indeed egged on, intimidation and violence against justices with whom they disagree. And folks, that continues today. These justices cannot go to a restaurant and have a meal. And what is the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, doing about this? Zip, zero, nada. The federal law says you cannot do this to a federal judge. But it's happening. They've been threatened to be killed. And the Department of Justice, the FBI, is doing zip, zero, nada. One even called for abolishing the court. Well, more than one. Such actions send a clear and unmistakable message that the left cannot enact its agenda legislatively as intended under the Constitution and has resorted to legislation from the bench, from the district courts to the Supreme Court. And folks, that's been going on for years and years. The Democratic Socialists, the left, have no principles, period, to stand on anymore. Back to Mr. Dawkins. Because of the rulings discussed above, America will soon find out if the left's agenda is as popular as their allies in the media would have the country believe, or whether it can only be achieved in violation of our American system of government, which is why they doth protest the High Court's recent rulings so much. We've been saying this for years, folks. As President Abraham Lincoln observed at Gettysburg, the framers created a democratic republic of the people, by the people, and for the people. The past term, the Supreme Court affirmed that such a democratic government, subject only to limitations contained within the Constitution and not within the heads and hearts of unelected judges and bureaucrats, is what we in America are to have. Great article, John Dawkins, former acting Attorney General for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Justice. Right, he explains it extremely well. So you see the contrast here. Those out there attacking the Constitution, attacking the founders, and when they're doing that, they're attacking America. When you attack a Constitution, when you attack the founding fathers, you're attacking the Constitution. And like I said earlier, in the last week, multitude of articles have popped up all over the country doing that. It's a concerted effort. They're following a template out there. So some writer gets a template. Here, write an article about this. And they're doing it. I mean, in the Boston Globe, the guy wrote, we need to forget the founding fathers. We should not be spelling the founding fathers with capital letters. Should be lowercase letters. They're nobodies. This is what we're facing. But the Supreme Court handed back to us, we the people, power, put it back in our hands. It gave it to our legislatures, who in the federal Congress are as lazy as you can get. They've done this for years and years, just passed it off, and let the administrative state do what they want to. And then when something bad goes wrong, oh, we didn't do that. It was those guys over there. Get the picture, folks. Alright, so let's wrap this up with a couple of quotes. George Carlin, the great comedian, he was so funny. Quote, "Political correctness is fascism pretending to be manners." unquote. This has turned out to be one of his most famous quotes. And the last quote is Donald J. Trump. Yes, Donald J. Trump. Quote, "We will never surrender American sovereignty to an unelected, unaccountable global bureaucracy. America is governed by Americans. We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism." Unquote. And that, folks, is the Medlock Post for today. May God bless America.